North Korea no longer has any U.S. citizens known to be in custody after releasing 3 detained Americans in recent weeks. Now, these detainees are the latest in a history of such captures. For nearly a year in 1968, 82 crew members of the U.S.S. Pueblo were held in North Korea after their ship was captured.
VOA's Kane Farabaugh got the chance to talk about the ordeal with Ed Murphy, who was a commanding officer back then on the Pueblo. Our Philip Alexiou caught up with Kane for more on what is known as the Pueblo incident.
Ed Murphy was second in command of the U.S.S. Pueblo while on a mission in the Sea of Japan to gather intelligence on Soviet and North Korean activity. He says several ships had harassed the Pueblo for days, but on January 23, 1968, North Korean torpedo boats opened fire on his poorly equipped vessel.
What happened was that they had been harassed a few times in the lead up to the attack by several vessels that had come close to their ship or had just basically taken pictures of what they were doing. It wasn't until they were actually fired upon in what would be the final sort of antagonistic maneuver that they realized that they were in trouble. And the ship wasn't equipped to defend itself. Ed Murphy even said that they had some weapons, but they just weren't able to use those weapons to defend themselves.
It was an exchange of fire, but it was one way. Yes, we didn't fire. We couldn't man the weapon.
The attack killed 1 sailor. Murphy and 9 others were wounded.
And really the focus when the attack began at that point was that there was this inevitability that they were going to be captured and taken prisoner. So the impetus was to destroy the classified material that was on that ship. And that was an effort that they did not at all succeed in. I mean, there was classified material left on the ship when the North Koreans eventually took it over.
So Ed Murphy said that they could not man the weapons. Why was that?
I think that is the source of some disagreement, some controversy. It was ultimately something that came up when there was an inquiry after they were released. They had done this before. They were simply there on a routine surveillance mission. There wasn't any sort of inclination that they would be engaged. And by the point at which they would have been able to fully operate that weapon, the ship had already been taken over by the North Koreans.
So the North Koreans board the ship. Describe what he told you about being captured. I assume he went into some detail about that as well, what it was like to be held captive for 11 months.
Yeah, well, before he was actually captured in that firing action, and when the assault began, Ed Murphy was hit. He was injured. They were actually taken off the ship, and they were taken to land onto North Korea, and they were transported around a few different places. Once they got to land in North Korea, that's where Ed Murphy says the saga or the episode for him really began, and that was the start of 11 months of verbal and physical abuse and mental and physical torture.
They're beating you with rifle butts and karate kicking you. They actually beat the side of my head where my earlobe was actually separated.
He had also explained, too, that there was a board that was placed behind his kneecaps on both of his legs. And there was this method by which the board could be pressed into his knees that caused his knees to become separated. He's never been able to run with his kids, and that, the way in which he walks today, to him in some ways is a lasting reminder of that torture in North Korea almost 40 years ago.
Is the U.S.S. Pueblo the only ship in the United States held captive anywhere in the world?
That's correct. Currently, it is the only ship, and actually it's one of the oldest commissioned ships in the U.S. Navy. As a matter of fact, the only other ship that's still commissioned, which is older than the U.S.S. Pueblo, is the U.S.S. Constitution, old Ironsides.
So how does that make Ed feel that the ship is still over there? Because he had made mention of that in your report, that it still bothers him.
Well, that was one of the final questions I had. I had explained to Ed Murphy that we had some footage that one of our language services at Voice of America had gathered, which is taking a tour of the U.S.S. Pueblo. And he said he'd be interested to see that, and that it is a real travesty or tragedy that ship didn't come home with its crew.
Because that's not a very friendly country toward Americans. Their people are trained to hate us.
Does he remain in touch with any of the crew members today?
He does, and there are reunions that the crew gets together. But the thing that he says strikes him the most is that the behavior of the North Koreans hasn't changed much. The tactics of using hostages as a propaganda value. We're now in 2014, and he says it's sad that he sees some of these same events playing out, 45 years later. There's so much history in between now and what happened with him that he would have thought that some of these things would have changed. But to him, it's kind of a tragedy or a travesty that he sees a lot of these things unfolding